Hello, and I'll be reading some of my Hypnotherapy Revealed book, The Introduction to Hypnotherapy, today. Try and get this somewhere. Internet seems a bit slow. My head's not moving in time with my head. So yeah, if you're not already subscribed and you like anything on my channel, feel free to subscribe. Obviously, if you find this interesting or helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. I've been having computer problems all day. It's been very irritating. But I'm here now. Hopefully this computer won't give me problems like my other one. I'm trying to edit Saturday's sleep meditation. That can go down there. My computer currently isn't letting me use half the settings. It's saying bits are missing, and it's only since I've done the Windows update. So I'm going to have to fix that after I'm done here. It's the same mug I use in every stream. The same one I use when I'm not in streams as well. So, obviously, my book, Hypnotherapy Revealed, Introduction to Hypnotherapy, is what I'll be reading some of today. I'm pretty much just starting at the beginning, so I don't know. I don't know where I'll stop and what will crop up. Just putting my legs up on a seat and chilling out. I'll have to lower this down now. So glad that you like my work. So while I'm reading, obviously I'm not going to be staring at the live chat. So hopefully everyone behaves over there. So I will start at the beginning. So when I was about 14 years old, I saw Paul McKenna's Hypnosis documentary on TV. That got me hooked. Being autistic, I struggled with communication skills and social interactions. I'd seen Paul McKenna's TV stage hypnosis shows and wanted to know how to do this thing called hypnosis, as I thought it would make my life so much easier. The perspective I had from watching the stage hypnosis was that the hypnotist clicked their fingers or did some other equally as mundane action, and somehow this managed to make people close their eyes, go loose and limp, and become responsive to the hypnotist's suggestions, seemingly without question. I didn't know how this worked, but I knew I wanted to learn it. I thought if I can figure out how to hypnotize people, then social interactions would become so much easier. I could click my fingers, hypnotize teachers or fellow students in school, and then tell them what I want them to do. This was my perspective of communication. It wasn't about reciprocity. It was all about me, what I wanted to talk about, how I wanted things to go. It wasn't about two-way communication, and I'd rather think of others in relation to and I'd rarely think of others in relation to social interactions and communication. That changed when I saw Paul McKenna's hypnosis documentary, Paul McKenna's Secrets of Hypnosis. That documentary was the first time that I saw hypnosis being discussed and used therapeutically. It also included a segment with the hypnotist hypnotizing someone, and Paul doing a voiceover to say that hypnotic inductions aren't allowed to be shown in full on British TV. So the induction will be shown with the sound off, and Paul will explain what the hypnotist is looking for while they're hypnotizing the subject. The phrase, "what the hypnotist is looking for," was followed by Paul talking about the hypnotist noticing the reddening of the face, the slowing rate of breathing, the flickering of the eyelids, and how these are signs the person is focusing inward and becoming hypnotized. This was a light bulb moment for me. Until this point, I didn't know anything about body language. I didn't realize that there were visible signs that revealed what was going on inside someone's mind and body. It got me thinking, If there are visible signs for someone becoming hypnotized, maybe there are visible signs if someone is angry or scared or happy. I obviously knew that if someone was crying, they were probably sad. If someone was violent, they were probably angry. And if someone was laughing, they were probably happy. But I wasn't good at picking up on subtler, non-verbal behaviours. And I definitely wasn't good at working out what caused these responses and why people had them. Over more than 25 years since I started my obsession with hypnosis and the ways people communicate, I've encountered many people who think the way I used to think before I saw that Paul McKenna documentary. They too may have seen stage hypnosis and the way the hypnotist appears to have instant control over the experiences of subjects, where subjects respond fully and unquestioningly to the hypnotist's suggestions, no matter how ridiculous. They have also seen the trance-like. They've also seen this trance-like state induced instantly in everyone, and a hypnotist must be able to use this power to suggest away people's problems just as easily as they can alter people's reality and experiences on stage. People will either believe what they see and be interested in it, or think there's no way someone will be able to do that to them. So they believe hypnosis must be play acting or something that would only work on weak willed people. Some will claim hypnosis doesn't exist, others will see the power and control the hypnotist seems to have over people against those people's will, and so assume it exists, but hypnosis is evil. Sorry, I'm yawning a lot. And we'll talk about it as if it's linked to the occult, to occult practices or devil worship. Before watching the documentary, I assumed that it was possible to learn the secret behind whatever it was that the hypnotist was doing, and to be able to click their fingers and have people hypnotized. I often clicked my fingers. No one ever became hypnotized by it. Angry sometimes, but never hypnotized. I thought there must be some magical way of doing it so that I could hypnotize and have instant control over anyone. Out of a desire to control my environment as a teenager, I was interested in different occult areas. I explored salt rituals, magic spells, psychic command, and more. People would talk about these things as if they were real, as if they got results from doing these things. This is also how the books were written. The authors of the books would write them as if everything were written, everything they were writing was true, and that what they were writing wasn't to be questioned. I didn't think about hypnosis being used in therapy until watching the documentary. But from reading some self-hypnosis books I'd bought, it looked like hypnotherapy was hypnotizing someone and then telling them that they'd no longer have the problem, and perhaps suggesting an alternative such as you will stop smoking and have healthy, clean and clear lungs. Or using aversion suggestions like cigarettes taste like tar. If you take a drag on a cigarette, it will taste like tar pouring down your throat. This approach played into the appearance of being like magic spells. The books on how to do magic spells were very similar to books on self-hypnosis, just slightly different wording. The magic spells would involve a ritual to put yourself into a trance, which could be reciting specific words, doing specific actions, or a mantra, or focusing on a symbol or flickering candle. This ritual connected you with the spirit world, or similar, followed by reciting the spell, sometimes repeatedly for a period of time. And then looking out for signs that the magic is working and noticing changes as they begin to happen in your life. The success of spells when done on things you have control over comes from the process you have done. By looking out for evidence that the spell has worked or evidence self-hypnosis has worked means your attention is focused on noticing positive changes. And as you notice these changes, this confirms that change is occurring and increases the chances change will continue to happen. After watching Paul McKenna, the Paul McKenna documentary, I realized that hypnosis isn't exactly what it appears to be on first impressions. I learned that hypnosis could be used therapeutically and that it was based on observations of the person being hypnotized, which made me think maybe that that could encourage that, made me think that the person, which made me think maybe anything that could encourage the changes you're looking for in someone could perhaps be used to hypnotize people. I didn't have the skills or knowledge at that time to know what I needed to do to hypnotize people. So I trusted self hypnosis books, which contained hypnotherapy scripts, and assumed that the writers of these books must know what they're talking about. So I first started using scripts. What I want to present here, though, is for you to take a different path to the one I took. I started learning hypnosis with scripts, believing that somehow the people who wrote the scripts had some special knowledge, and that the way the scripts were worded was the way things had to be said. This is incorrect. The scripts are just the author's views on one way that things could be worded. They aren't the way you must They aren't the way you must do hypnosis or therapy. And often, what you find in a script won't be what is right for the client sat opposite you in therapy session. I want you to dive straight into doing unscripted hypnotherapy. Book 3 of the Hypnotherapy Revealed series is full of hypnosis and therapy scripts. But by the time you get to book 3, I want you to be confident that you can hypnotize and practice without scripts. The scripts just give ideas for the types of things you can say and do to hypnotize people and ways you can word things. Various hypnotic techniques are covered in this book. Reading scripts is a helpful way to see how these various techniques can be applied when inducing hypnosis in different ways and when working with different problems. Before you hypnotize or work therapeutically with people, if you aren't already trained, you should take professional face-to-face training where an experienced instructor can assess your abilities and you can get at least dozens of hours of practice at hypnotizing and working with people in a safe and controlled environment. And you should never work with people with problems you aren't qualified and trained to treat. Hypnotherapy is an unusual therapeutic modality. You don't find counselors, psychotherapists, youth workers, parenting support staff, educational support staff, social workers, family therapists, addiction counselors, cognitive behavioral therapists, psychoanalysts, or any other talking therapist feeling the need to do all their work with a script. Yet many hypnotherapists want a script for working with the type of client, with this type of client, and a script for working with that type of client. Yet they're doing talking therapy the same as all of these other professionals, but worryingly don't seem to believe in themselves and their training enough to do the actual therapy. In this first volume of my Hypnotherapy Revealed series, I cover an overview of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, of the trance nature of reality, and about the pattern matching brain. I share the underpinning knowledge to understand what to do when working hypnotically with people, and also teach you about self hypnosis and structured hypnotic inductions. Let me just have a bit of coffee, and then I'll move on to the next chapter. It's because it's early. Are you losing count? I'm normally tired at this time. I haven't woken up until about 10. And then I'm supposed to be going back to sleep. Right, let's carry on. It's probably because I put my feet up as well. That's probably what did it. The way I like to teach people is from the deepest level up, rather than the surface level down. My experience is that most hypnotherapy courses and books teach the surface level information first and may never touch on the deeper nature of things. They'll often give you an explanation of what hypnosis is, perhaps some history of hypnosis, and then they'll teach you some techniques for doing hypnosis. When you understand the deeper nature of trance and pattern matching, and the different way hypnosis can be evoked, you don't need to have structured inductions or techniques for doing hypnosis. You can create your own ways of eliciting hypnotic responses in people in a client centered way that's unique to each person you work with. This first volume will teach you various theories of hypnosis, including what I think hypnosis is. It'll teach you different ways hypnosis can be evoked and deepened, and will teach you how you can use self hypnosis for yourself and why it can be helpful to teach clients self hypnosis. You'll also learn a selection of hypnotherapeutic techniques, how to carry changes from within therapy sessions into clients' lives, and how hypnosis fits into therapy, because there is a misconception that hypnotherapy is somehow different from other psychological therapies, when in fact hypnotherapy is just some form of therapy being done with hypnosis as an adjunct to that therapy. Hypnosis itself isn't a therapy. The trance nature of reality. We're going to start this book looking at trance and the trance nature of reality. Hypnotists and hypnotherapists will often talk about hypnotic trance, and they'll use the word trance to mean a state that the hypnotist is guiding the client into. The idea of trance and states is an interesting one. There is no known state that is a hypnotic state. So hypnosis researchers are largely in agreement against the state argument for hypnosis and in favor of a non-state model of hypnosis, mainly variations on the socio-cognitive model of hypnosis. What I'll be showing here is my view of what trance is and breaking the idea of trance away from hypnosis. It may seem odd that I've just said that no hypnotic trance has ever been identified, despite significant advances in brain scanning technology. But that doesn't mean there isn't something I would call trance. And this is a mind-body phenomena. There isn't a single entity called trance, and I'll give a definition of what I would call the hypnotic trance. You're never not in a trance. People are always in a trance. The question isn't, is someone in a trance or not? The question is, what trance is this person in? How deep are they in this trance? And does it include the hypnotist? Trance is really just a term to describe focus of attention. This focus of attention can span the conscious and non-conscious aspects of ourselves, and there's a hierarchy of importance of that attentional focus. This will all make sense as you read through or listen through this chapter, as this all links back to what my theory of hypnosis is. Non-conscious, that which is not currently conscious. In my books, you'll read a few terms. One of those terms is non-conscious. Often, when you read hypnotherapy books or attend hypnotherapy training courses, they'll teach about the conscious and unconscious minds. I'll often use the term unconscious when doing hypnotic work with people because it's a term they're more familiar with. But to me, I don't think unconscious is the correct term to use. The idea is that you have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. This is often how I talk about it with clients and use this wording specifically for a hypnotic and therapeutic reason, which I'll reveal later. But there's a flaw with this idea. You don't have an unconscious mind. You have implicit processes. These are things which happen without conscious control. Your heart is beating, you're breathing, neurons are firing in specific patterns to create thoughts, awareness, and interpretations. Millions of cellular processes are taking place every second throughout your body, even changes at the level of your DNA. All of this and more are happening without you consciously controlling any of it. In fact, it would be a daunting and likely impossible task to do all of these things consciously. And if you forgot to do even one of these things, the outcome could be catastrophic for you. Imagine getting distracted and forgetting to do whatever it is that you have to do to beat your heart every second or so. And even more frequently if you start exercising or you need to escape danger. So the implicit processes are all unconscious. Using hypnosis, meditation, or some other mind-body practices, you may be able to direct some of these processes. And some you can have limited control over, like breathing. You can choose to speed up or slow down your breathing. but you can't consciously permanently stop breathing. The worst case scenario is that you'd pass out, and while passed out, your breathing will continue on its own. It won't remain stopped. Under the definition of the unconscious mind are all of a person's life learnings, memories, and experiences. This is where the term unconscious becomes the wrong term, because many of these things may be unconscious at one moment and then conscious at another. You may not have thought about your fifth birthday until someone reminded you of it. So it isn't like there are two minds, a conscious and an unconscious mind. There is a single brain, and the spotlight of conscious attention is very narrow, so it only illuminates a small amount of information in any given moment. And some information is locked away and truly unconscious. These are the things which can only be done non consciously, although you can have some conscious guidance over some of these processes. When you look around or read this, most of what you think you see is actually made up and is very low resolution. Huge amounts of data enter your brain through the senses. This would all be overwhelming if you were to experience it unfiltered. So your brain decides non-consciously, based on past knowledge, what perspective of reality to share with you. This is important to understanding trance, because you don't technically have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, but instead you have a single mind with a beam of conscious awareness, and everything else is outside of that conscious awareness. I prefer the term non-conscious. Some of what is non-conscious are implicit processes. Other things are non-conscious. Other things that are non-conscious could be conscious if you focused on them. So what is trance? When someone watches a film or TV or in the cinema, they go into a trance. The more absorbing the film, the deeper they enter trance. Likewise with playing computer games. The trance becomes increasingly focused the deeper the person goes. The person in trance may ignore someone asking if they want a cup of tea, or they may answer but not be aware that they answered. The deeper they are, the more absorbed they are, the more responsive they are to what is happening on the screen. If they watch a horror film and aren't really paying attention, they don't have much change in anxiety levels, like sweating, pulse increasing, etc. If they're in a dark room and really absorbed in the film, they'll jump at scary bits. They'll feel scared with faster pulse, sweating, etc. They may even become absorbed enough to separate from reality to the point they temporarily believe what they're seeing. They may not realize this, though, until after they've watched the film and feel uncomfortable turning the lights off. This is a sign that they did believe what they were watching while watching it, as they're still in the trance and having a seemingly irrational response, because they know consciously that they're at home, likely safe, and definitely not going to have what they saw on the film happen to them here and now. I mentioned that there is a hierarchy of importance of the attentional focus. This hierarchy starts non-consciously within our autonomic nervous system. As information enters our senses, our attention is focused initially based on our immediate survival. The first stage is an immediate behavioral reflex without involvement from the brain. Like when you touch a hot stove, you pull your hand away before you have time to register pain, have an emotional reaction, or say ouch. The next level up laces the incoming sensory input with high levels of emotion and is around whether we should fight, flee, or freeze, processed through our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. There's a greater chance of prediction error at this level because it's more important to be safe than right. As information passes up through the brain, it gets increasingly processed as more time is taken over the information. Responses can be more complex, and there's a reduction in prediction error. For example, say someone has a fear of snakes and they're walking along a woodland path, and there's a snake-shaped stick on the path a short way in front of them. The eyes take in information. While this is being processed within the brain, the stick matches a pattern for resembling a snake. This triggers the fight, flight, freeze response, and a rush of emotion causes fear or anxiety. Consciously at this point, the person doesn't know why they suddenly feel scared and ready to run. They may initially freeze because of how they feel. This short moment of freezing gives a bit of time for a signal to arrive that directs their awareness towards the stick. And they become consciously aware of it and either run before they consciously process what they're seeing, or take a second or two to take in what they're seeing, giving their brain time to process that it's just a stick and not a snake. Each of these stages reduces uncertainty and makes the pattern matching more accurate. By the way, in the book, obviously, there's references to what I'm saying. If you end up buying this and reading this, obviously, it's available in ebook and paperback. You can find the links on danjoneshypnosis.com, or just head straight to something like Amazon. Next, we focus on medium and longer term survival, which is mainly processed by the central nervous system. This is focusing on food, water, and mating. The focus above this is on novelty and new learning. We learn instinctive responses in relation to survival situations at an earlier stage than this, though. Therefore, something we have never seen before catches our attention, or something we've done for the first time, or just learned, gives us a rush of dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone, giving us a small high. This focuses our attention on wanting to do more of the same, or to continually progress. Dopamine isn't so much a pleasure or reward chemical, it's more an attention and motivation chemical. If you see someone you find attractive, you'll get a release of dopamine, which will make you want to approach the person. If you approach the person and fail, but feel like you nearly succeeded, then you get a dopamine rush despite failing, which encourages you to try again. The same thing happens when you invent something. Imagine being a Stone Age person and seeing lightning strike a tree. You go over to the tree and realize that there's a glowing, crackling light around the tree, and you notice that that's hot. You decide to take a branch with the glowing, crackling light back to your cave and use this to keep you warm. Seeing the lightning strike would give you a dopamine rush. Realizing the fire was warm would give you another rush at this discovery. Realizing you have a good idea and can use this fire to keep yourself and your family warm would give you another rush. Thus, realizing this fire can spread to other wood and catch other things on fire would give you another dopamine rush. Each of these bursts of dopamine narrow and focus your attention around the novelty of new learning. They encourage new neuronal growth, and because the dopamine fades with time and the same thing doesn't give you the same high, you have to keep learning, keep doing more to keep getting the same feel-good sensation. This drives civilization and helps to encourage creativity. But consciously, you aren't normally aware that your behaviors are being driven in this way. Dopamine operates like a behavioral activation chemical, motivating you to do specific behaviors. It isn't just about towards motivation. Dopamine also leads to away from motivation. You get spikes of dopamine at times of high stress to focus your attention and motivate you away from the stress. For example, noticing a threat will release a spike of dopamine to motivate you to run away from the situation. It helps you to make you want to do a behavior. All of this can happen with very little to no conscious awareness or involvement. We also respond to communication non-consciously. Before conscious awareness developed, we were creatures living in the present, responding to the world around us instinctively. Consciousness likely developed about 500 million or so years ago. Initially, life just responded to the environment in a very basic, in the present, towards or away from way. Then over the millennia, the range of sensory input increased, meaning more processing power was needed to make sense of all the incoming information. Nervous systems became increasingly complex. Obviously, an animal that could see light and dark had greater chances of survival over an animal that had no vision, but was the same in all other regards. Then an animal that could make out shapes would have an advantage over an animal which could just see light and dark. And an animal which had depth perception would have an advantage over an animal with would have an advantage over this animal. With each stage of evolution, there's an increase in information that needs to be processed. If an animal can't process that information fast enough, it probably won't have an evolutionary advantage. It may be that a trait develops, like an improvement in vision, that pushes current processing power to the limit. But this may encourage neurogenesis, and over time, some of the animals are born with greater neuronal capacity and can more comfortably process the incoming information. As millions of years passed, more complexity and nuanced ways of responding develop. As mentioned above, there is still the rapid responding, which isn't very accurate, but great for immediate survival. But then over time, the nuanced way of responding helps the animal to make better judgments over when to expend energy escaping a predator or hunting food. And eventually, basic conscious awareness develops, allowing for the animal to not just respond instinctively based on past experiences, but to plan based on past experiences and to foresee potential future outcomes. This conscious awareness has continued to develop into an awareness of the self, an ability for abstract thought, for increased creativity, flexible communication systems, and so much more. We're so used to our conscious awareness that we don't often realize how incredible it is. We often give it more credit, though, than it deserves for guiding our behaviors. We act out behaviors often instinctively in response to the world around us, and yet, because we like to feel a sense of agency and control over our lives, we tell ourselves an ongoing story about how and why we decided to do the things we do. This isn't to say that we don't decide to do things and don't have free will. It just isn't quite what we think it is. Our conscious decisions are based on the trance we're viewing reality from within, rather than a free choice. If someone's depressed and faced with a situation, they'll be likely to make a different decision to if they were feeling happy and optimistic about things. The higher cortex is far more recent part of our brain, and one of the last areas to be informed of incoming signals. So it has far less control over things than we think. Many therapies talk about thoughts coming before emotions and then behaviors, yet all the sensory information entering our brain is processed and triggering emotions long before thoughts arise. A quote I like is, "You cannot feel love and think hate, but you can think love and still feel hate." I like to think of trance reality like music. Every point of attention is like a musical note. The resulting flow of harmonies and discords is our trance experience. Sometimes we may have many notes playing simultaneously, or we may have many notes playing one after the other as attention flows, or we may have just one or two notes playing at a time, which could change to a few other notes over time, or we could have just one or two notes playing continuously. Notes may be emphasized and played loudly or softly. Some notes may stand out more than others and be easier to focus on, even if we don't like the sound of them, and the resulting music is our own. Even if we don't like the sound of them, and the resulting music is our own unique trance experience. So no two people will ever have exactly the same experience. Everyone, even when presenting perhaps with the same problem, like depression, will have their own mind-body experience of depression. There may be similarities, but their experience will be unique to them as an individual. The fewer notes played, the purer or deeper the trance. Often, it is in some of the supporting notes that's the way to crack the negative trance and help the person into a more positive trance. Like a DJ merging two songs from one song to another, starting at a point where the songs overlap, perhaps just on a few notes, or a particular rhythm, or changing the speed of a song to start to match another song, and gradually transitioning into the next song. For a trance to include the hypnotist or another person, they need to be involved in creating the trance, or involved in the trance in some way. And the subject needs to continue to allow them to be involved. Love is a natural trance state, where you have allowed someone to be involved in your trance. It's by thinking about them or things associated with them or seeing or talking to them that puts you into that love trance. All of these associations are like triggers for the trance. In the same way, a hypnotherapist may say, when you see this packet of cigarettes, you'll feel pleasure at knowing you can leave that packet shut. Likewise, the hypnotherapist wants to be part of the client's experience so that as they talk with the client, they go into a relevant trance but allow the hypnotherapist to be a part of it. They can then help support them from where they are to a preferred trance. If the hypnotherapist doesn't do this, they may as well say, go into a trance and do whatever you want. Trance is a mind-body state from within which you experience the world. Trance is a focused state of attention. When someone goes into a trance, they view and experience the world through that trance. All emotional states are trance states. When someone is angry, they go into an anger trance, where they see only their point of view. Everything is black and white, whilst in that anger trance state. Digestive system shuts down, their immune system is reduced, and many other physiological changes take place. The angrier they are, the more focused they become, and the greater the changes to their mind and body, and the more fully they enter a mind-body state of anger. I've dealt with people trying to kill others and felt no risk to myself, as they're so focused on the person they're trying to kill. It's as if I'm not even there. Depression is another common trance state where people take on a specific thinking style. Everything good that happens is someone else's fault. Everything bad that happens is their fault. Things are always bad, and any good that happens is just a one-off exception. As well as obvious emotional trance states like these, people also go into trance doing everyday tasks. To carry out any task without thinking about it, like tying shoelaces, brushing teeth, shaking hands, driving, etc. People enter an autopilot type of trance. Many rapid and shock inductions occur by interrupting these automatic patterns. For example, if you put your hand out to shake someone else's hand and then do something different in the middle of the handshake, you take their natural trance and interrupt it, creating a focused state of mind where they're still in that trance because they haven't completed the pattern. And for a moment, they're waiting for something that will inform them what to do to close the pattern. This is the point that hypnotists give a direct idea for the person to follow. In hypnosis, this is usually for the person to sleep. The person interprets this to mean to be hypnotized and responsive to the hypnotist. If the person doesn't feel comfortable with this, they will usually just ignore the idea or momentarily go with the idea and then bring themselves back out of it moments later. You haven't taken over their mind or anything. That isn't what hypnosis is about. It's about communicating ideas and people deciding largely non-consciously whether they want to engage with those ideas or not. Whenever you interrupt a pattern, the orientation response fires in the person's brain. This response is not normally physically noticeable. On occasion it can be though. For example, hypnagogic jerks are sometimes the result of the orientation response, which is a pontogeniculo-occipital wave. The jump you get when you hear a loud bang and want to know what it is also the response firing. Once it's fired, you wait momentarily in a state of limbo, a trance state. Likewise, if a natural pattern is interrupted, you pause in that trance state, where your brain is primed to update neural connections. This, for many people, is only a pause for a second or so, while your brain latches on to what's happening next, or what the explanation is. For example, discovering that a loud bang was a car backfiring, or being told to sleep by a hypnotist. Just by having a pattern interrupted, the person then acts on this information. Most people can ignore the information or snap out of it any moment as new information comes in. So if they didn't want to be hypnotized and noticed that they were being hypnotized, they could decide not to follow what the hypnotist is saying and come out of trance. There are many natural trances, including what could be termed hypnotic or optimal learning state. Anger is a trance state, so is love or relaxation. The stronger the emotion generated, the deeper and more focused the trance. The more focused the trance, the harder it is to transition to another trance, especially one that is very different. So if you're in a depression trance, you're unlikely to suddenly enter a happiness trance. It doesn't mean you can't, it's just less likely to happen because the person less likely to happen just because the person wants it or tries to think about that different trance. When I worked in residential homes, myself and some other staff were managing someone who was being very aggressive. He was definitely in a deep anger trance. We were managing him calmly and containing his behaviour, but he wasn't calming down. Then a member of staff passed wind, and suddenly the aggressive person started to laugh uncontrollably. The novelty and unexpected nature of that person passing wind broke through the anger trance, where calm talking and reason had failed. What hypnotherapists would term the therapeutic hypnotic trance is accessing the flow or optimal learning state, which includes activation of the REM state, which is the neurological process that occurs to update patterns of behavior. This doesn't mean it is necessary to put someone in that state to get phenomena, though. It's just the state we update patterns and learn best in. We access this state naturally when we're learning something new. Students in class who are learning will often gaze off as if in a daydream while their brain integrates the new learning with what they already know. The same happens every 90 to 120 minutes or so, something called our basic rest and activity cycle. This is a cycle that goes from a peak of alertness and external focus down to a trough of inner focus or daydreaming. It's like a computer program auto-saving every hour and a half or so that the information is retained. If at these times you notice you're beginning to daydream and so you grab a coffee and you keep doing this every time you notice yourself beginning to daydream, this can impact on your ability to learn and remember. At night, we use dreaming as a way of consolidating new learning and updating patterns of behavior. This is like clicking the save button on a computer program to do a proper save of the day's content. People talk about depth of trance and want to know how to get deeper trance. A trance is deeper the more focused it is. This includes totally diffuse trance states, where the focus is so broad and all-inclusive that there becomes only one awareness, an open awareness of everything. The focus could be attaching to focusing solely on one thing, whether this is a thought, an idea, a feeling, an object, or unattaching from focusing on anything to allow everything to float by without latching onto any thoughts or ideas or feelings. In therapy, a trance can be achieved easiest by focusing on the problem and the elements that make up the problem. Whether this is the stages of the problem or feelings underlying the problem, or by focusing on the solution and what will be experienced when the solution happens. To deepen the trance, you just ask for more detail, so that the client has to focus more on the experience to find that detail. And in doing so, they go deeper into the trance. You can then work from within the trance of the problem or the solution to help the client to create change and update their patterns of behavior. There are many indicators that someone's in a hypnotic trance or deeply focused state. Often, the more absorbed in a specific trance someone is, the more pronounced indicators can be. So some of the indicators are things like catalepsy, automaticity, different voice quality, shorter sentences and words, relaxed muscles, less body movement, economy of body movement, smoother facial muscles, lack of startle reflex, takes things literally, slow or no swallowing reflex, slow or no blinking, slower pulse, slower respiration, pupil change, facial symmetry, breathing from the stomach, changes in facial color, eyes roll back, eyes flutter, instant hypnotic phenomena. Not all of these indicators happen all of the time. Sometimes some people may show some indicators but not others, or there may be a delay before some responses. This delay can often happen with hypnotic phenomena, tasks that clients are asked to carry out. This happens because often internal time distortion occurs, sometimes on a non-conscious level, that can make the time it takes for a client to carry out a behavior seem quicker to the client than it appears to the therapist. There can also be a delay due to needing some processing time uh, to automatically action what they've been asked to do. Some things like breathing and pulse rate slowing down can also depend on how hypnosis has been facilitated and what the client is doing in their mind at that moment. I will stop for just a moment, and then I might read the next chapter or some of it. Let me have some of my drink. Just reading your comments. There is hypnagogic and hypnopompic. Yeah, people often have driving trances or any action that ends up becoming automatic. And I did my most of my jobs I've done kind of automatically, especially things like pot washing. So I will read the next bit. The pattern matching brain. The brain's essentially a pattern matching machine. When you learn something new, it triggers related patterns of neural activity and growth in the brain. Updating those neural pathways with this new information and lacing this with emotion. The stronger the emotion, the stronger the memory. The stronger memories have a greater non conscious impact on us and our future behavior and decisions. They're also, they are also more memorable. This happens because the amygdala boosts memory encoding by enhancing attention and perception and can increase memory retention by triggering the release of stress or arousal hormones. When you think of something emotional that you don't act on, your brain keeps the pattern open, waiting for a resolution to the pattern. This could be a real resolution or metaphorical because the pattern matching works on the level of the pattern rather than the content. For example, if someone gets into an argument with their partner and rather than resolve the conflict, one of them storms off, then the emotionally aroused pattern isn't completed, so it gets resolved metaphorically when dreaming. This could be within a daydream, or most likely during nighttime dreaming that occurs during REM, the rapid eye movement sleep. Unborn babies spend so much time in REM sleep during the last 3 months before birth, as this is a vital time for laying down new patterns of behavior, like suckling, as well as various developmental emotion regulation, and learning abilities. When babies are born prematurely, this can impact on the child's development, including social, emotional learning, and communication. Research is finding that when a caregiver focuses on calm physical bonding between themselves and child, this can promote development in the brain and body of the child. So, some of the effects of being born prematurely can be tackled by interventions in those crucially early months after birth. The patterns are generic, they need to be for survival. It would do no good having a specific pattern that could only be met by specific criteria. For example, imagine a baby was born that would only suckle a nipple and not feed from a bottle. Or if a baby could only learn English language, but not born in a country with, but was born in a country with a different language that had perhaps completely different linguistic structure, the baby would struggle to survive. The patterns need to be general enough that the child can adapt to whatever life throws at them. The patterns also need to be adjustable so that any changes to the environment can be learned and added to the pattern. And so learning, especially for survival, isn't specific but general. Some of this flexibility reduces when synaptic pruning takes place after the first few years of life, continues during childhood, and becomes intensive again during teenage years. But we still hold on to most of our sloppy pattern matching abilities. Most psychological problems and some physiological problems arise from faulty pattern matching. What this means is that an unhelpful way of relating to certain stimuli has developed and become an automatic, non conscious way of responding. For example, someone walks out onto a stage to give a talk, then blushing and feeling embarrassed and thinking, I'm stupid, I can't do this. Or a smoker answering the telephone, then feeling the need for a cigarette, and so thinking, I've got to have a cigarette, and then smoking. In both of these examples, a specific stimulus triggered the way the person was going to respond, whether they consciously wanted to or not. This risk of faulty pattern matching is a risk of our generalized pattern matching process. This generalized pattern matching is helpful for survival, but because the pattern matching process errs on the side of caution, it can lead to responses that turn out to be problems when our brain is trying to keep us safe, like developing a phobia or post traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or having certain situations cause anxiety. People can also develop somatic metaphors, where the body communicates a metaphorical representation of an underlying problem. For example, someone could come in with a pain in the neck and talk about a difficult relationship that they have that needs sorting out, but they don't know how to approach the situation, like an issue with an employer. Or perhaps they present with stiffness in a joint and then talk about feeling stuck with something in life. Or they present with migraines, which are impairing their vision, and then talk about something from their life that they're trying to ignore and not focus on. Obviously, there isn't always an underlying problem. The migraine may just be a migraine. The pain in the neck may just be a pain in the neck. And stiff joints may just be stiff joints. However, if you explore with the client when the problem developed, what else was going on for the client at the time, when it's worse, when it's better, and noticing connections between what the client is talking about and their ongoing experience, you may find patterns like these that otherwise would have been overlooked. Clients often don't recognize that their physiological problem is a somatic metaphor. It isn't necessary for the therapist to interpret this for the client. It may not be appropriate and the interpretation may be wrong. Yet the therapist can still work with this knowledge through utilization, which we'll cover later in this book, to address the underlying issue. So you don't have to tell a client that the pain in the neck is because of difficulties with their employer, who they see as a pain in the neck, but haven't made the connection themselves consciously. However, having this knowledge of the client rubbing their neck every time they talk about their employer or work can let you see the connection and insight, giving you some connection and insight, giving you something you can utilize. So instead of interpreting symbolism and trying to give the client conscious understanding, the therapist is creatively and therapeutically using the symbolism to enhance the effectiveness of therapy and personalize the treatment to the client. Pattern matching occurs in a more general way than many therapists realize. Someone whose close friend is giving them the cold shoulder may be so emotionally bothered by this that they actually trigger the pattern as a frozen shoulder due to the general nature of the pattern. Milton Erickson spoke about how every pattern is triggered for the meaning of what is said. He mentioned how the word run has over 142 different meanings, so all meanings known to the listener will be triggered when they hear the word run. Likewise, if you want to trigger the pattern in the client for family relationships, you can talk about your own mother or other significant family member, and the client will think about their family relationships and have easier access to family relationships information, like childhood memories, even when they don't realize that they're thinking about it. This works well where directly asking about something could encourage resistance. This is also how priming works, where someone can hold a warm cup of coffee shortly before meeting or reading a description of a person, and they're more likely to warm to that person. And if they've briefly handled an iced coffee before meeting or reading the same description, they're more likely to feel cold towards that person. So the idea of warmth or cold influences these interpersonal judgment dimensions, priming the neurological pattern around temperature and not opinions or ideas about other traits of the person. As a hypnotherapist, you can use these same ideas in your work. During therapy with a couple, you can talk with the clients about things associated with warmth, like mentioning the weather outside if it's a warm day, talking about a holiday to a warm location, using language related to warmth, like warming up and hot topic, all shortly before directing the couple's attention to each other and starting the therapy. They'll now be more likely to warm to each other. Pattern matching is involved in everything that we do, whether it's the routine we go through when we get up in the morning, or instinctively knowing to stop the car when you see a red traffic light. The important thing is to remember, the important thing to remember is that patterns can be changed. Patterns aren't stuck in place, they're adaptable. Your brain is always updating its patterns. In everyday life, this happens automatically with each new piece of learning. Unfortunately, this can lead to patterns being reinforced, causing problems to last, like connecting smoking with relaxing. Then each time you get stressed or bored and need to relax, you smoke. As this does temporarily relax you, you assume it was because of the cigarettes, so this reinforces the pattern. In reality, it's the way that a smoker breathes, taking deep breaths and having longer out breaths than in breaths while they smoke, that relaxes them, not the cigarette, as nicotine is a stimulant and not a relaxant. Generally, the higher the emotion associated with the pattern, or the more instinctive the pattern, the harder it is to change by willpower alone. In therapy sessions, or taking some time to help yourself, it's possible to alter these patterns by choice. For example, the smoker can practice breathing in to the count of 7 and out to the count of 11. This longer out breath triggers the parasympathetic nervous system or relaxation response, and if done for a minute or two, can give a light sense of euphoria and relaxation. When this is practiced, it offers the smoker a new choice. They can use this breathing technique instead of cigarettes, as they've added this to their pattern for relaxing, and can still carry out the rest of the habitual patterns around the smoking, like getting a craving, recognizing it as their brain telling them they need to take a break and relax, going outside, perhaps taking a drink, like water outside with them, socializing while taking a break, and doing some deep 7-Eleven breathing, before feeling relaxed and refreshed and hydrated, ready to get back into work. This isn't about using willpower, but about understanding the signal for what it is, a signal to take a break and relax for a short while, and then going with the signal rather than fighting it. Some behaviors are so frequently carried out that they become habits where a stimulus automatically triggers the response. So the pattern matching displayed here is that you perceive a stimulus which triggers a pattern match to an automatic non-conscious response, like a behavior or emotion, and possibly thoughts. As mentioned, generally, the higher the level of emotion attached to carrying out the behavior, the fewer repetitions are needed to make that habit automatic. You only need to get scared by a spider once to have a lifelong phobia of spiders, or you only need to touch a hot stove once to instinctively never do it again. Low emotion and highly complex behaviors can take many repetitions. As an adult, it can take anywhere between 18 to 254 days to turn a low emotion or complex behavior into an automatic behavior, with the average being around 76 days. This is interesting, as most people make therapeutic changes within about 3 or 4 months. If they engage with the therapy, and this is about the if they engage with the therapy, and this is about the length of time taken for what would be called brief therapy. Babies will repeat the same thing over and over and over until they master it, whether it's walking or speaking a language. These become instinctive automatic behaviors in the early years of life. We learn thousands of habits from observing and copying those around us. Copying those around us thousands of times across those years. This can make bad habits formed in childhood or even teenage years very hard to break once you become an adult. If someone has spent most of their teens and current adult life responding to life stressors by feeling anxious and worrying, then because this can be a strong emotion behavior to the stimulus of various stressors, including just thinking about stressors, it can be difficult with willpower alone to try to stop worrying and stop feeling anxious, because they aren't doing this consciously. They're doing this instinctively because they've mastered how to do it. Consciously deciding that when various stressors or thinking about various stressors occurs, they'll just relax and be mindful and acknowledge that they're just thinking and don't have to feel anxious is unlikely to be successful, and is very difficult to do. What needs to change is the non-conscious pattern. This is where the use of hypnosis comes in, and why the use of hypnosis makes approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy using hypnosis as an adjunct to the therapy more effective than cognitive behavioral therapy alone. As a practitioner, you should learn to notice processes or patterns. This is where the problem formation and solutions lie. The content is useful for rapport or for finding resources or highlighting the problem areas you need to extract patterns from. But it's the structure of the problems and solutions that's important to finding a fast way to help the client, rather than the content of the problem. Many therapists get bogged down in content. They get drawn in by all the talk of the problem. Often, therapists begin to feel emotional about the content, especially if the content is sad or disturbing to them, and they then miss the structure of what they're being told. As a hypnotherapist, your role is to intervene on the non-conscious part of the problem, the pattern, which occurs between the external stimulus and before any emotions and thoughts have occurred. You want to help the client so that the stimulus triggers a pattern that leads to a different automatic behavior or emotion, and so different behaviors and thoughts. Most other therapies work on problems from after the problem has already been triggered. For example, someone may feel anxious and be trying to change their thinking to calm themselves down. What you want is for the stimulus to not trigger anxiety in the first place. Obviously, it's important to let the client talk to some extent about the content of the problem if they feel the need to do so. But as a therapist, you want to be able to listen and notice patterns. For example, it could be that when the client is talking about mundane things, they go into detail, saying that that is what is important. Yet, when they come to talk about what seems to be the underlying issue, they skirt over it. Or a client could do a specific gesture like rubbing their neck when talking about a partner. If they repeatedly did this each time they talked about that person, you could notice the pattern and assume that maybe on some level they feel the partner is a pain in the neck, even if it hasn't been verbally stated. So the therapist can then test this theory by changing subject and revisiting it after a while and see if the same behavior happens again. Or perhaps the client closes their eyes every time they mention a specific word or phrase, and you test this and notice that when you say those words and the client does the same, when you say those words, the client does the same. Or when you talk about something unrelated that encourages them to say those words in a different context, they do the same behaviors there. Look out for where you can change patterns easiest. It could be that you can change the frequency of the pattern, or the duration, or the time that the pattern takes place. It could be that you add an extra stage to the pattern, or change a stage in the pattern, or interrupt the pattern in some other way. Most of what we've covered throughout this book, or most of what we will be covered throughout this book, aims to make alterations to patterns, teaching how best to do this within different problems, as well as the more common changes to patterns. It's useful to learn how to notice patterns for yourself. Not everyone is the same. So what works for one person may not work well for somebody else. For example, to cure phobias, there's a really useful technique that involves visualizing, the rewind technique. What you may find is that not everyone is able to follow the instructions well, or they believe they can't visualize well, so you would have to do something different with them. Often, the language that they say will give away what they need. They may say, I need to be able to step back and see what's happening, or I just wish that the problem would disappear. So, with the first of these clients, you may help them to dissociate from the problem and view it as if it's on a TV screen and analyze what they see happening, and then work out conclusions and understandings from what they've seen taking place. With the second of these clients, you may have the client go through a process of separating from the problem and then shrinking it down until it disappears and seeing what it reveals in its place. Or maybe it disappears because it moves off into the distance until it vanishes and then reveals something new. When communicating with people, you can use the idea of pattern matching. As the brain works by pattern matching, this opens up many possibilities. For example, you can communicate in metaphors that match patterns that you want the client to access. This is especially effective when using the client's own metaphors. You can stimulate parts of patterns that will guide thinking in specific directions. For example, if you want the client to think about their relationship with their mother, you can start talking about your childhood and being taken to school. This will stimulate related neurological patterns around the client, making those patterns more accessible and easier to work with. The SET model. The pattern matching model I like to use is called the SET model. This stands for stimulus, emotion, thought. This is how we experience the world. Something, a stimulus, sets off a neural pattern, triggering a PGI wave, leading to pattern matching, which leads to an emotional reaction and or instinctive behaviors, followed by thoughts. The reason for the emotion coming before the thought is that it allows for you to respond to a stimulus, if necessary, without conscious thought needing to be involved in it, if it will help for survival. We can also respond with automatic reflex behaviors without emotions or thoughts. The limbic system is a primitive part of our brain. This is the area which receives and first processes information coming from the senses. If it seems there may be a threat, this information gets fast tracked to the amygdala, which is the brain's fight, flight, freeze center, to trigger an immediate behavioral response. The neocortex is the last part of the brain to respond to the incoming information. There are many processes which happen prior to conscious awareness and thought that can lead to some interesting illusions, where consciously knowing your senses are wrong still doesn't give you the ability to do anything about it, because the processes involved in causing the illusion are happening non consciously. One example is Adelson's illusion. where you perceive two identical shaded squares as being different colors to each other because of the location and the way the brain interprets the visual information. You don't process the scene consciously first and then decide to alter your perception. Another interesting illusion is the McGurk effect, where you hear someone saying bar, and if the video you watch has them mouthing bar, this is what you hear. If, on the other hand, the video you watch has them mouthing the word far, then you hear far and not bar, despite the fact that the only word being said is bar. Stimuli triggering emotions and automatic behaviors without the need to engage conscious awareness is a great survival tactic, where even fractions of a second could mean the difference between life and death. One issue with this, though, is that responses are often black and white, not as nuanced as when conscious thought is involved. So someone may be angry, scared, in love, with scared or in love. With conscious thought, there can be more variety, like irritated, annoyed, upset, nervous, excited, liking something. Conscious thought can be a stimulus. It isn't often the first stimulus. Normally, something sets the scene, so the person could already be feeling anxious about something. And now, when they think about anything else, they often think about anything else, they think about it from the perspective of being in an anxious trance. And so perhaps feel less certain about that thing than they did previously. Or someone could think about an up and coming talk they have to give and feel anxious about it, and then think sentences like, I'll mess it up. Everyone will think I'm stupid. And so picturing the talk in their mind was the stimulus for feeling anxious, which was the stimulus for thinking negative thoughts, which may feed back into influencing what happens in the imagined talk, which leads to more emotions and more thoughts. In reality, to decide to think about the talk, the person probably thought, what do I have to do next week? Or some other similar sentence. This sentence was likely triggered by a situation or environmental stimulus. For example, I'm sat here typing this, which got me thinking I should check my diary and see what I've got to do next week, because, like someone talking about a relative to get someone else to think about their family relationships, me typing this about future events has got me thinking about my own future events. Many therapeutic approaches work on addressing the thinking to break the cycle and stop the emotion, rather than working on the initial instinctive response to the initial stimulus and addressing the root of the problem. If you work on the thinking to treat anxiety, for example, then a stimulus is already pattern matched to triggering a feeling of anxiety. So you're trying to create a positive thought from a bed of anxiety. Even when the person's trying to think positively, the stimulus or situation is still triggering the pattern match to anxious feelings, making it difficult to break free, even with positive thoughts. If you work on helping the client to link the stimulus to a feeling of calmness, then you're more likely, as a consequence, to naturally have different thinking, which will cycle to further feelings of calmness or confidence, rather than leading to the old anxious thinking. Right, I'm going to stop there. I will just show you so that's one of the pictures that I was just mentioning, the one where there's two squares that are identical, the middle square and the top square. They're identical color, but on that picture, that square looks a different color to that square, and then the lines just prove that it's not. So the next chapter is what is hypnosis, and I will probably move on to that tomorrow. Yeah, let me have a look and see, pop that up a bit. Yeah, people would achieve so much if they just remained like babies, kept a baby mindset. Hence using the early learning set. Do I have any coffee left? Just the last scummy little bit. So that was the first. Obviously, you can buy this on Amazon in paperback and ebook. You can order it in other online and offline bookshops. Not that many people are going to offline bookshops currently. So that was the introduction and the first few chapters. The first 1, 2, 3, 4 chapters. You missed most of it. Hopefully you weren't looking out the window when I was talking, although I did say that that's allowed. So which bits were you not understanding? Just asking in case I can clarify some of the bits. Yeah, if you've got Kindle Unlimited, it's free, I think. How long did it take me to write? I can't remember. Quite a while. Nowhere near as long as my third book has taken me, which has taken me about a year longer than a year longer than it's supposed to have done. I thought I'd have it done in a couple of months, and I'm still going. It's been going for an hour and 17 minutes. Every day apart from Mondays, I do a live stream at 7:30 UK time. So whatever time that is, your time. So whatever time an hour and 17 minutes ago was your time. And so, yeah, I've just been reading the first few chapters of my Hypnotherapy Revealed, trying to make it seeable, Introduction to Hypnotherapy book. And so I've talked about, got to remember what I've talked about. So I talked about the fact that I always work and teach from the deepest level first, so that you've got an underlying basis of everything, so that everything makes sense to you, rather than from the top down, where you say, here's a bunch of techniques, and then no one ever gets to learning the deeper stuff, and they end up relying on the techniques as if the techniques are the kind of the only thing you need. So I talked about a bit of an introduction to hypnotherapy, and then the trance nature of reality, the pattern matching brain, and tomorrow I will talk about what is hypnosis. So I've just read the first, I will tell you how many pages of the book. 54 pages, 55 pages. So I've read the first 55 pages at the moment. So sounds like an interesting hypno story. So I don't know if anyone has any questions so far, or thoughts or views on that so far. That's all just really more of the neurology, or sort of the sort of information behind why the hypnosis-y part that we get onto tomorrow, why that kind of works, or why it's kind of what that is based on. So hopefully it all made. I try not to use too much jargon. I try to make sure that everything's in plain English. Techniques. It depends on the technique. So people I've done the rewind technique with, for example, obviously that has just lasted. Um, I know people who years and years and years later uh, don't have any kind of response to that. Obviously, the same with um, there's a technique I frequently use for breaking patterns for things like habits, like for smokers or um, people who want to break a drinking habit or whatever. And if it works, it's not like the technique suddenly stops working at some future point. It has worked for the person. What ends up fading or not fading, it does its job exactly as it's supposed to. Is things like where you're repeating a technique. So, say you were doing like the anchoring that I talked about before, of bringing like a thumb and a finger together. If you think, right, I'm going to anchor, I'm going to sit at home so that you can close your eyes and really focus on it. I'm going to anchor the feeling of being really confident. And so you get yourself feeling really confident, you sit confidently, you bring your thumb and finger together as a kind of reminder for that confident feeling. You then release the thumb and finger, let that feeling go from you, kind of maybe look around you a bit, and then you close your eyes again. You get all that feeling back in again. And at the peak of having all that feeling, or just approaching the peak of having that feeling there again, you bring your thumb and finger back together again and you link it again with your thumb and finger. So obviously, all you're doing is linking how you're feeling at any when you bring your thumb and finger together with bringing your thumb and finger together. So if you now go and say you're going to go and do a talk and you need to feel confident, as you go to do the talk, you may bring your thumb and finger together to bring up all those feelings of confidence so that you're confident to do the talk. But if you go to do the talk and you feel anxious, so you arrive to do the talk and you start feeling anxious and then you go and bring your thumb and finger together, it's not that the technique becomes less effective. It's that what you've now done is linked that feeling anxious in that moment with the thumb and finger coming together, as well as obviously evoking the confidence. So you've kind of watered down the confidence a bit and added to it a bit of nervousness. So over time, if you only ever trigger it at a time when you're feeling nervous, so if you only ever trigger the confidence after you've started feeling nervous, every single time you bring your thumb and finger together, you trigger the confidence, but also link the nervousness with the thumb and finger coming together. So what you want is to make sure that if you're going to do something like anchoring and fire the anchor off, you want to do that before you feel so if you know I always feel nervous once I arrive at the destination or whatever it happens to be, then you would need to bring the thumb and finger together to give the confidence before you get to the nervous part. Um, or ideally, set up something else. Like ideally, you don't want to have to use something like bringing your thumb and finger together. You want to do something like making it so that when you think of going to the talk, you feel calm and comfortable. And then when you arrive at the talk, you feel, perhaps energized and looking forward to it or whatever. You want to make it so that your instinctive response, ideally, you want to set it up so your instinctive response is the response you want. So you don't need the technique. You don't need to be trying to pull your thumb and finger together or anything like that. Um, yeah, I get people saying an hour is too long, um, but I point out there is quite a lot in that hour um, that you learn. Just trying to see what people have said. So yeah, so obviously the whole point of all this part is to kind of explain why you would even bother wanting to learn this kind of information as a therapist. That you want to be able to know how to recognize um, or how to intervene at an earlier stage than trying to change people after they've already, or try and encourage people to change after they've already perhaps become anxious or whatever. You want to be able to, in an ideal world, make it so that the stimulus doesn't lead to anxiety in the first place. Most likely not. The trouble is, obviously it's different in different places in the world, but just taking the UK, someone could say tomorrow, I am a hypnotherapist, and then see clients as a hypnotherapist. They may never ever, they may have just read the word and decided, I don't have a job, I need to be doing something. I've heard you can make money as a hypnotherapist, so I've heard about these things, I'm going to call myself one of them and I'm going to do that. You don't need to, there's not like, there's nothing to stop someone just deciding tomorrow that they want to call themselves a hypnotherapist and then practice as a hypnotherapist. The chances are, I like to think they wouldn't manage to get insurance, although I think there are some places that might insure them still. Hopefully they wouldn't be able to become accredited with any join any organizations, but again, I'm sure there are some organizations that they could join. And then I know people who literally have just created a name for an organization themselves, given it an elaborate name, said they're a member of this elaborate organization, but they're the one that's made that website for the organization and added themselves to it. So you can go from literally no training. You might encounter a hypnotherapist who has no training through to someone who has lots of training. So there's no kind of, you never know what you're going to get. And I would say, having read every single book that you can see behind me, I know for a fact that a lot of what's in my book is, there's little bits and pieces in different books behind me, predominantly the sciencey ones right here on this shelf. But most of what's in my book isn't in most of the hypnotherapy books available, isn't taught in most of the courses out there, which is very annoying. But there's a mismatch between what goes on within scientific research, which is why there's some of it in these books here, but it's different bits of research named in different books depending on what the book is about. It's not like you can necessarily buy one book and everything's going to be in that one book. But there's a mismatch between what ends up coming out in research and what ends up being taught on training courses. And that's kind of the problem. And so when I wrote this, now I've written hypnotherapy books before. I've obviously written over 30 books, as I've kind of mentioned a number of times. But when I wrote this book, I very specifically didn't want to say anything unless I had looked up to see if there's any evidence to back up my claims. So I include obviously references throughout this, so that when I make a claim, I've got the references to back it up. But this also went for things like when it came to talking about things like the history of hypnosis. For the history of hypnosis, for example, there's one claim that's made on every hypnotherapy training course pretty much I've ever attended since about 2000. And I've always taught it as well because I've assumed it was true, because it is literally on every single hypnotherapy course. It's also information that is quoted in a lot of hypnotherapy books about the history of hypnosis. And so obviously, because this book I write specifically Obviously, if I'm going to say something, I want the evidence for it before I say it. So I wanted to find the reference to know that this was accurate, and I traced it to Hidden Depths. I traced it to this book here, Hidden Depths, and this book had the quote, had the bit of information that I had been taught since 2000 on many hypnotherapy courses I've attended. It had that bit of information that's also in many of these other books behind me, all of which quote this book as, or the ones that quote the source, quote this book as the source. But this book doesn't quote the source. This book just names it as a matter of fact. And so I then tried to research this fact on Google and sort of wherever I could find, Google Scholar and on Google. And I couldn't find it anywhere. So it's not in my book, because it seems that the only place it exists is in this book. It doesn't seem to be anywhere else. And that was about, it says that Wang Tai was the father of Chinese medicine and was doing hypnotic practices like 3,000 years ago, or whatever the quote is. And so I thought, well, if this is allegedly the father of Chinese medicine, then their name must be able to come up in a Google search, because Chinese medicine isn't exactly a small thing. If there's a very significant character within Chinese medicine, then it must come up. And what I wanted was not just to find out who this person was and to actually find their name. I wanted to find exactly, it doesn't say what they were doing. It says that they were doing hypnosis thousands of years ago. I wanted to know the exact practices I wanted to read the exact practices that it's claimed that they were doing, so that if I'm about to make this quote, I want to be able to read what they were doing and think, oh yeah, I'd interpret that as hypnosis as well. And if I couldn't read it and interpret it as hypnosis myself, then it wasn't going to make it into my book. And as I couldn't even find them, let alone find evidence that they did something hypnosis-y, it just didn't make it into my book. So that's something that I made different about this book compared to some of my previous books, where I was just sharing my knowledge and just thinking, well, if anyone's interested, they can always, like I would, I just go and research and find out more information. So my view was, with this book, I want to give actual references. So I've actually got the reference for that quote. All I've got to do is find the page that quote was on. So yeah, so let me just have a look. Basic rest and activity cycle. Larkin 2011. It is, if I just show you the pages, you'll have to pause this later. It's from a web link. Well, you might be able to just find it through the title. Thoughts or feelings, ? Which comes first, ? And that's from the Applied Neuroscience blog. So I've got the actual web address in here, but it's not the easiest to just sort of say. It's got like underscores and all sorts. So I'll show it as well, but it's Larkin 2011. If that's in focus. Go away, bright light. Obviously, I don't want the bright light to go away, really, because it's got to see me, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I will say that again, just in case you haven't caught it. Thoughts or feelings? Question mark. Which comes first? Question mark. And that's from the Applied Neuroscience blog, and that was from 2011. So yeah, so for me, it was just very important that I put everything into yeah, I make sure everything's referenced, and try and write something different to the hypnotherapy books that I've read, something that has everything in one place. Yeah, chemistry comes first. So, any other questions or any thoughts on anything I said? Anything you found interesting? Or did I just bore you for an hour and 17 minutes? Because if I did, I'm probably going to bore you for another hour and 17 minutes reading what hypnosis is tomorrow. I'm just having a look to see how long that chapter is. Oh, it's a reasonably long chapter, my What Hypnosis Is chapter. I'm just checking that I haven't missed a chapter here. Although technically I give everything away about what hypnosis is at the very beginning, but still, I managed to talk for an entire, or write for an entire chapter. But yeah, how long did the book take to write? I don't know. I saw that question. Hundreds and hundreds of hours. But there was a lot of time spent reading to write the book. Yeah, tomorrow you'll have questions on today's material, but tomorrow I'll have my head in a book reading tomorrow's material. But I do get surprised. For example, it is incredibly commonly taught that emotions come before thoughts. That thoughts come before emotions, despite the fact that we now live in an age of fMRI scanners and all sorts of other scanners that consistently show that information comes in and goes into our more primitive parts of our brain first, and that the higher cortex and where all the thoughts happen is the last part of our brain to get given any information to work with. And obviously, I can't remember who it is. There's the popular comment that free will is a persistent illusion, and that's kind of true. Yeah, but the difficulty is that if people don't have questions, then I end up at the streams where I don't have something pre-planned. I sit here kind of thinking, right, what you're going to ask. The live chat focuses on general chat that doesn't involve me. So I don't then have anything to say or contribute of any meaning. And then someone will say something that they want to know when there's like 15 minutes left. I don't think I know his work with fMRI, but then when it comes to names, if there's one thing that I don't remember often is people's names, because I have literally no interest in most authors' names or most people's names. So when I read science papers, unless I'm writing a book, in fact, even then I don't read the name, I just write the names down. I don't pay attention to them. But I normally, if I read science papers, I don't even bother reading the title, because that's normally some ridiculously long, sort of convoluted way of wording things. I don't bother reading who did the research, because I've got no interest in who did the research, unless it seems that I start realizing, oh, this sounds similar to other research, and then I realize that it's the same person, and then I think, oh, you're an interesting person. You seem to be churning out all of these research papers, and then I remember their name because it's another thing for me to use as a search term. No, why would science and hypnosis conflict? Hypnosis is just about focusing attention. It's the scientific community are more than comfortable accepting hypnosis, as are doctors and things. The people who seem to not accept hypnosis are normally lay people who don't know anything about the subject. The people who accept it are scientists and doctors and sort of the medical community. Dentists use hypnosis all the time. Um, there's literally scientific journals about hypnosis. All these science books behind me here, these ones on that shelf, they're all things like research articles and things, university papers about hypnosis. Hypnosis is something that you scientifically study. You use skeptical inquiry into exploring it, and then trying to debunk bits of it and disprove things and prove each other wrong until you hopefully get closer to the truth. Yeah, Pegasus. But yeah, the general chats do lead to more like discovery about different bits and pieces. But they end up kind of, the general chats that lead to that, normally they've started with me talking about something else. A bit like here. We're having a kind of general chat, but it started because I was reading. The general chats never seem to actually, no one dives straight in with questions, or very rarely dive in with questions. Normally it's chat that doesn't include me or involve me, that I've obviously got no interest, no interest or involvement in. Well, I think obviously I don't know what you mean by getting to know the complete picture, but the idea of, say, learning in terms of from a book, or from me reading, is that it follows a certain pattern of how you're learning it, rather than learning bits all out of place and then not getting a complete picture because it doesn't make sense, because you've missed the foundation bits or you've missed other bits that would make it make sense. Because obviously, it's, from my point of view, it's equally as easy to sit here and have a general chat. Well, not as easy, but it's doable. It's just that the last time we tried that, um, there was no conversation, and I think we got 45 minutes in before there'd actually been any actual kind of anything to work with. I know 30 minutes into that one, this is the one I think where we did the implementation intentions. 30 minutes in, I was thinking, well, definitely going to finish this within an hour, because no one's asking anything. Everyone's busy talking among themselves. They don't need me to be here. Um, Whereas during Autism Awareness Week, obviously there was reading a bit of autism stuff that then stimulated questions. Um, What I did say about having questions prepared so that um, I could just come on here and you'd be able to know what it is that you'd want to ask, and you'd be able to then just ask them and I could then answer them. But then no one ever prepared any questions. No one ever had anything to say. So uh, that's why I started thinking, right, let's find things to do on the stream so that it's more kind of, there's only so much showing different hypnotherapy books that I can do without, um, or whatever products I've got lying around me. Um, yeah, obviously, while I'm reading, it's not worth writing, um, because I'm not going to be scrolling back. But in previous ones, I've not been reading. I've been staring at the screen at the live chat and having no questions asked, and then just trying to think, what can I show or do? Um, which obviously I then would just reach for something next to me. So obviously, the ones where I'm reading, if I'm not scrolling back through the live chat, there is no point writing a question till I finish and then ask what questions you've got. So it's easier to type the question and leave it typed and not ask it. Just sort of so that you can then post it once I am back in the room, so to speak. Yeah, thinking ahead of time is what I had suggested. I'd said um, days ago about writing down questions ahead of time, or even sharing questions with me ahead of time, so that I could instantly start by answering the questions that I've received before the live stream, ready so that I, come straight on and ask questions, or that you've got written down so that you can then just post it as soon as it goes live. Obviously, I have, um, but that wouldn't be directed at me because you'd expect that as the answer. And it's logical that any hypnotist out there who's watched these will have done. I had said in the previous, I don't know which up, it was up until it was when I wasn't reading books. I'd suggested about suggesting them over in the group. I said go and suggest. Someone commented saying I got the group name right, um, but I suggested about asking the questions in the group and over on Facebook, and then I would just have them there, not to answer in the group, but someone could easily just start a here are some questions for tomorrow night or something like that, or for tomorrow because it might not be nighttime for you. Ah, yeah. I was reading your comment and it wasn't making sense to me. And then I've remembered we were asked about implementation intentions. So you will be answering that. Obviously, the word trying implies failure. I don't do any one to one sessions with anyone nowadays. I try and make sure all of my information I've got to share is available kind of online somewhere or other, so that I don't kind of need to do any sessions. Yeah, there are certain words that aren't helpful to use. It's like if you say, uh, "Would you mind going and trying to open the door?" The person instantly um, thinks the door might be stiff or might be a problem to open. The thing you need to find is what is the one commonality with every one of the paperwork situations. Is it like, do you always see your pen? Do you have like a specific pen you use so that whenever you pick up that pen, you remember to do them, or whatever it is you're trying to get the if then, whatever you're trying to get the then part is the if that you see a certain pen, or is it that you see the papers themselves, or is it, what is it? What is that one thing that is in every single situation or the majority of situations? Because that's the thing, it's just trying to find the suitable if part. Because there must be, if you have to do paperwork, there must be something that lets you know you have to do it. Um, because or else, why would you do it? Yeah, there must be like, um, I don't know, I've received them, and so I don't know exactly what the sort of the role is and what the in relation to the paperwork, but there must be like, I receive them, and when I receive them, I know I have to do them, and so I then do them, or I see them on a specific table somewhere because that's where you always place them, and so or that's where they always end up, or I don't know. Do you receive them in the post? Do you receive them by email? Whatever it is, there must be something that lets you know. Oh yes, I've got this job to do, and whatever that something is, I'm. I don't know if it does change every single time, yeah. So it's not helpful, obviously, to use the word try, ideally, unless you want someone to struggle. The advanced Ericksonian hypnotherapy script in paperback is still for sale. Definitely not anywhere near 800 or 900 or whatever dollars. It's if what you're seeing is that price, you're obviously looking at some alternative listing as opposed to the proper listing. I'm just heading over to Amazon, although I'm currently on amazon.co.uk. But if you just follow the link straight from my website, you'll get taken straight to the book. Um, I'm already on the hypnotherapy books page. The hypnotherapy scripts book is the one that's going to end up being updated, or that's the one that I'm working on. It's the third book in my Hypnotherapy Revealed series. Okay, I've no idea why on Amazon.com, for some reason currently, it's not down. I'm just having a look. Come on, computer. Just trying to work out why it's not showing the normal version. There. Why is there a version for £935? That's stupid. Okay, now it's okay. For some reason, when I went to it, it was showing a weird price, but it's now showing the correct price. I think there must have been some issue somewhere at Amazon. But it is showing up. You can buy it on Amazon.com as a paperback for, let me just go back, for $19.86, or used for $15.99. Let me just share this link. So the scripts one, I found it here, but that's my lulu.com version, not my Amazon version. So I'm trying to figure out why the Amazon version isn't there, or at least is there, but it's coming up as the wrong. It's coming up as other sellers. Right, view on Amazon. Let's do this. No, don't view on Amazon. Yes, because it should be $19.99. So according to Amazon, this is the page that it should be on, but it's the new. It doesn't seem to be listed for sale by Amazon itself. It should. The retail price of it over here. The retail price of it is $18.99, and that's what should show. But I don't know if it's showing the wrong price because of me being in the UK trying to look at Amazon.com and maybe that's why it's not showing me the official listing. Do I have a specific hypnotic phenomena I like to cause see when I hypnotize people or use to hypnotize people? No. Yeah, I was the only person in my school that I knew of who had any interest in hypnosis. We never obviously had like stage hypnotists or anything in school, or come and do any shows in the school. And I didn't really interact with much other people in school, so I just sort of kept it all to myself. Um, yeah, even if it's a sporadic thing, it's what is how do you know that you've got paperwork to complete? Yeah, then there must be some way of you seeing the paperwork or you receiving the paperwork, or yeah, there must be something that lets you know, right, I've got paperwork to complete. And so linking it to whatever that is, like, do you receive it by email? Do you receive it in the post? Do you pick it up? What's the kind of the thing that lets you know you've got the paperwork to complete in the first place? Um, is it something you can set up your own stimulus for? So, can you put it in a specific location so that you've got it set up that it's like, when I see it in this location, if I see it in this location, then I will do that paperwork. And maybe it's set up on a desk in a certain room where you kind of know it's in there. And when you then choose to go and look in there, that's where you put it. And so it's suddenly there. And then you think, oh, yeah, that's there. I've got to do that. Um, there's always more to learn. Um, there's always progress that can be made. Um, well, there's got to be something prior to sort of deadline looms, must do paperwork. The paperwork must exist before the deadline looms. That's kind of the sort of thing is what is the, like I don't think about doing paying my water bill, one of my water bills, until I receive the letter through the post twice a year or whatever it is that says you need to pay your water bill. So for me, that's not a common thing. I never have any idea when it's going to arrive. I can never remember. I just know about twice a year I get a letter through the post that says you've got to pay the water bill. You can pay it in either two installments, or you can just, it's not a lot of money, um, or you can just pay it all off in one installment. But there's not like something at home that lets me know that. And there is a deadline. There is if you don't pay the water by, there's kind of, it must be paid by this date. But the deadline isn't the thing that lets me know that I've got that water bill. It arrives through the post. I then put it down somewhere so that I can remember, right, I'm going to have to do that. Um, hello. So I put it down somewhere so I know I've got to do it. So it wouldn't be the deadline that's the thing that I would set up with reminding me to do it, because then you've got to think how much of a how do you decide on the deadline? It would be the fact that I've left it perhaps standing next to my computer. And so I might kind of say, if I see the water bill stood next to the computer, then I will go online and pay the bill. Um, so that would be the thing that would remind me, uh, not the fact that it has to be paid by whatever the date is. Um, yep, tomorrow we read again, like we did last summer. Sorry, it just sounds like a song. Um, so I always think there's stuff that can be learned about hypnosis or therapy generally. There's always I it's far less frequent that I find something uh, that I haven't learned before. So when I buy books, normally it's like, oh yeah, that research in the book just backs up what I already know previously. It's just perhaps a bit updated. Sometimes it's not even updated. Um, so yeah, so there's always stuff that I can know, but it just happens far less. And so I don't know. I can't imagine that I've explored everything. There's things I would explore further if I had friends. Um, Things that if I had friends that were into hypnosis who would meet with me regularly to kind of do hypnosis-y stuff. Um, there's things I'd possibly kind of explore, like consciousnessy things, but I wouldn't want it to be on their terms, though. That's the thing. I wouldn't want it to be there having to teach them everything first. I'd want them just to be wanting to explore consciousness and explore the different techniques. And I don't have people in my life who are like that. And then nowadays, now that I'm self-employed, I would have to find time to fit it all in. Whereas when I was employed, and a large part of me just thought, well, anything I do outside of work isn't for trying to make a living. Um, I just wouldn't, I would do what I want outside of work. But now I prioritize making a living above using that time to have fun's probably the wrong word, but to have fun. Um, and I think with the obviously the negative associations, the idea is obviously here we were looking at what is the stimulus, what is the thing that reminds you that what is it that lets you know you've got the paperwork that has to be done. Um, so as I say, it could be that you leave it in a certain location, or if you want to set it up so that you've got the same stimulus all the time. Um, because then the whole time it isn't in that location, clearly it doesn't fire off. I don't really have a favorite thing to explore. It's just kind of exploring human potential and learning as much as I can about reality and the nature of reality and about um, our place in it and things like that. All the usual sort of stuff that people are fascinated with, um, or at least things I think people should be fascinated with. Because generally, there's not, like, for example, hypnosis isn't something that I would say is a favorite, so to speak, idea or subject. Um, it's just kind of something that helps me to understand the world better. Um, you can't get the book technically on my site. The links on my site take you to Amazon, because that's where I get the best royalties if I have it bought on Amazon. But I don't get the best royalty if it's bought by a second hand or another seller. I only get the royalties if it's sold by Amazon themselves, um, because it's a book published by Amazon, which is why it's odd that on the American site currently, for whatever reason, that specific book, which, as I say, is I start that book by saying I absolutely hate the fact that I'm writing this book, because I do really hate the fact that I've written a book of scripts. It's kind of, I don't know, almost abhorrent, the thought that I've written a book of scripts, or even more so, the thought that people might read the scripts and then try and use them like verbatim and just read them off to people instead of uh, working hard at it and looking at clients. The important thing is looking at clients and not looking at a bit of paper. Which is why for years I refused to write a book of scripts. But then I sort of thought, well, if people use it as a way of having a look at the ideas around different structures of things, then it could be helpful. But what I hate is if someone is a new student and they're looking at scripts, because that's the quickest way to make sure that they won't progress, is for them to start looking at scripts. I think you've got to know that you can do hypnosis before you start looking at scripts, and that you can do therapy before you start looking at scripts. And then you look at scripts to help you to kind of just get an idea of how things could be worded slightly differently. Aldous Huxley is okay as an author. I don't really have favorite authors. I just kind of try and read things that are on topics that I'm interested in at whatever the time is. But yeah, so my books are published by Amazon themselves. It's odd because normally the US ones are the ones that are all in stock. So it's odd that the listing for it, which is the one that I shared, the second one that I shared is the official page for it. It's just not available for whatever reason, or at least not available from Amazon themselves. But I would probably not buy it until I release my new book, because obviously someone else bought it reasonably recently from the US. Yeah, that's an okay book. I've got Godhead just up beside me here. I had someone else buy my Advanced Ericksonian Hypnotherapy Scripts book reasonably recently, and I thought, oh no, there was someone who knew me from the US, and I thought, oh no, why did you buy that? If you just waited like a few more months, you'd have the significantly kind of expanded, the one I've been spending the last year and a half or whatever updating and working on, and they've gone and bought an old version that is in an embarrassment to me to have sort of still available. But yeah, I like so as you sort of mentioned about the consciousness, I obviously do like Aldous Huxley's work around consciousness, and obviously his and Milton Erickson's work that they were doing around consciousness. Yeah, so I wouldn't buy it from any other seller. They have overinflated. I can tell you right now, the retail price of the book that you shouldn't pay any more than is $18.99 for the paperback. If it's listed anywhere for more than that, given that Amazon themselves are selling it allegedly for $18.99, then I would say that you're being ripped off. And I don't get any of the, if you buy it for more than that, it's not like I get any of the royalties, any more money. I get less royalties because you've bought it from someone other than Amazon. Because Amazon's kind of deal to try and sweeten the deal for authors is that they offer you a better rate of royalty when the sale happens on their own platform, and a worse rate of royalty when the sale happens. So a normal rate of royalty, technically, when the sale happens from bookshops or from other sellers on Amazon. So if that seller has not only has inflated the price, not only then paying more for the book than it's worth, but I'm also making less from that sale. So you're paying more and I'm making less, which is entirely the wrong way round. It should be you pay less and I make more. I don't know if it's any cheaper ordering it from the UK, Amazon instead. If you just take that second link, the second link I shared is to the official book. So if you take that link and just cut off the .com and put .co.uk instead, it might be that it's cheaper to buy it .co.uk and pay, like, I don't know if there's postage or not, or what the postage would be, but that might work out cheaper. But it should be for sale on .com, but it doesn't look like it is for some reason. Yeah, people are always abusing the system, I think, with Amazon. I'm sure after this I'll probably contact Amazon and ask how come it's not for sale currently. At least their own version of it isn't currently for sale or listed. So I will probably go shortly. I might hang around until 20 past, just so it's kind of an even number. And then tomorrow I'll either carry on reading more of this, or if you don't want me to, make sure you've got questions so that I've got something to respond to, or else I have nothing to respond to. Obviously, those of you in my hypnosis or hypnotherapy, Dan Jones Hypnotherapy Studies Facebook group will know that. So you mentioned about scripts being a good training wheel. For me, the better training thing is something like my hypnotherapy script creator, and I've shared that in the Dan Jones Hypnotherapy Studies group before. It should still be there under the files section. There's also a French guy who's created a French version of it. And so, yeah, and that to me is a significantly better way of learning than using scripts, because what you're doing is creating. I'd worked out how many billions of clients. I can't remember how many it was, but it was many billions of billions of billions of billions of clients that you can create using the hypnotherapy training tool that I've created. And the idea is it just keeps creating new clients, and then you put the countdown timer on and you work out what you would do. There's different exercises that it tells you can do. And it tells you how to do the exercises as groups, as a pair, so that one of you would role play the client that you've just auto generated, and the other person would then be the therapist, and then you swap over. and do it again. But yeah, that's a vastly better way of learning, because even if, for example, I used to use it myself, I created it for me, obviously, and I used to use it myself. I'd have it on my mobile phone. I'd be sat on the bus going to and from work, and I would press to auto generate a client, and then I'd press the timer, and then I would do what I can to think, what would I do to treat this client based on the problem it says they've got, based on their age, based on their interests, based on the random bits of information that have come out in this session, which is on the screen, based on the problem they've said they want treated. All these sort of bits of information, based on their hobbies, all different bits and pieces. Anyone can join the Facebook group if you've got an interest in it. Anyone who ends up spamming it and saying, take my course, take my course, take my course, very quickly leaves the group. But if people are there kind of learning and stuff, and interacting, then that's fine. But yeah, and so I used to just practice the entire bus journey to work. I would just practice, and then the entire bus journey home, I'd practice just using that one thing. It's just an HTML thing that I created so that it works on any web browser, whether that's a web browser on your mobile phone or whatever. So yeah, and I'm pretty sure that it's still on the group. It did used to be on a website of mine, but then I migrated to WordPress, and on WordPress, it wouldn't allow me to put my own HTML websites on there, annoyingly, or web pages. I'm just having a look. Yeah, Ericksonian hypnotherapy training tool. You can download it off of there. There's obviously lots and lots of bits to download. There's my safeguarding training course, PowerPoint. There's a solution focused achieving family goals, snakes and ladders game that I created. My hypnotic assassin book in PDF. Communicating with my unconscious mind document, which is a transcript of people interviewing me under hypnosis. Myths about Erickson document. One of my hypnotherapy books. An outline of 4 game dynamics. Language patterns. Human Given's approach to working with parents of challenging teens. A psychocellular healing document. The Learn Hypnosis in an Hour PDF. An article I wrote about Hitler and mass hypnosis, the original one there, and hypnotherapy script creator and treatment planner, among other things. So yeah, there's all sorts of bits and pieces there. Okay, well, I'm going now as well, pretty much. And I'll see those of you who join me here. I will see you tomorrow. And I've got to now try and get my other computer working so that I can get Saturday's story edited with the sound effects and everything before Friday, so that it can go live before Saturday. So thank you again for joining me here. I'll see those of you tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. my time, for anyone interested.